Hey guys, I'm John. This is my first quick music history video, and to start off, we're going to be talking about a band I really enjoy called Spazz. They're a 90s power violence band that shaped the San Francisco Bay Area punk scene in ways that still influence the local scene to this day. So without further delay, let's get into it. Now, before we can talk about Spazz, we have to talk about how the local Bay Area scene looked like in the late 80s and early 90s. By the late 80s, many of the 80s hardcore punk bands like Dead Kennedys had broken up, and the Bay Area scene went through a switch in its sound. The scene became dominated by Lookout Records bands such as Operation Ivy, Crimp Shrine, and most famously, Green Day, among many others. These bands regularly played 924 Gilman Street in Berkeley, California, and unlike their hardcore predecessors, these bands took inspiration from the more old-school punk sound of the 70s. This new, easier-to-listen-to sound led to many of the bands that came out of this late 80s and early 90s Bay Area punk scene, such as Rancid and, as previously mentioned, Green Day, to later be signed by major labels and their songs be given regular airtime on the radio. It is in this scene where the story of Spazz begins. One of the Lookout Records bands in the late 80s and early 90s Bay Area punk scene was a band called Sticky. Sticky formed in 1985 and regularly played at 924 Gilman Street. However, 2 years later in 1987, their old bassist James Porter left the band, leading them to replace him with future Spazz bassist Chris Dodge. Now, Chris Dodge was already in another punk band called No Use for a Name, but he quit so that he could play in Sticky. Sticky stuck out from the other Lookout Records bands because unlike many of the other bands, they were a hardcore punk band. Chris Dodge played with Sticky for a couple of years until their breakup in 1990. Towards the end of Sticky's run as a band, Chris Dodge would use the slowdown of regular Sticky rehearsals to finally form his own record label, Slap-A-Ham Records, in 1989. During this time, Slap-A-Ham Records released a myriad of records from different power violence bands such as Infest and PHC Split and Capitalist Casualty's Disassembly Line. Slap-A-Ham Records were a big reason why power violence took off during the 90s, with many of the bands they signed being at the forefront of the 90s West Coast power violence scene. After the breakup of Sticky, Chris Dodge would not be in any bands for a few years to focus on building up Slap-A-Ham Records. In 1992, Chris Dodge met a man named Dennis who ran a zine. In one of the editions, there was an interview with Plutocracy and Spazz drummer Max Ward. In the interview, Max mentioned that he was jamming some short and fast hardcore songs with Spazz guitarist Dan Lactose, but that they needed a bassist. After reading the interview, Chris contacted Max expressing his interest, so Max sent Chris a cassette tape with 10 songs they had already written on it. In just one day, they managed to run through all the songs, record them, mix them, and release them. On January 19th, 1993, Spazz released the first Spazz 7-inch under Slap-A-Ham Records. In the early days of Spazz, they didn't really know what they were going for, and didn't really have much direction. Chris even later mentioned in an interview, "From the beginning, we all agreed we wanted to create something musically punishing, but we also didn't want to follow the cookie-cutter approach of so many hardcore bands. So they decided to experiment by adding samples to their power violence songs, which created their unique sound as heard on their 1994 debut LP, Dwarf Jester Rising." Even after the release of Dwarf Jester Rising, Spazz was not yet a very popular band in the Bay Area scene, receiving small turnouts despite regularly playing shows with other power violence bands like Capitalist Casualties. However, as soon as 1995 rolled around, things started to turn around for Spazz. Starting in 1995, Spazz was recording way more than before. In 1995, Spazz released 2 splits, one with Brutal Truth and one with Subversion. Then in 1996, Spazz released 3 more splits, one with Romantic Gorilla, one with Toast, and one with Jimmy Walker. As Spazz started to release more music, they gained much more popularity in the Bay Area scene. All this new music and their sudden rise in popularity led up to the release of their second full-length album, La Devancha, in 1997 under Sound Pollution Records. La Devancha solidified Spazz's sound and was very well received, with almost 10,000 copies having been sold. As a result of this newfound popularity and the release of their new album, Spazz decided to go on their first ever national tour that same year. While on tour during the summer of 1997, they played across the nation with such bands as Power Violence band Black Armory's Jacket and Midwest emo band The Get Up Kids. Spazz was on the rise. After their national tour, Spazz continued to release more splits and another EP in the years leading up to their final full-length album, and my personal favorite album by them, Crush, Kill, Destroy, which was released in 1999 under Slap-A-Ham Records. I absolutely love this album. It's such an inspiration on the music I write, and the song Let's Fucking Go is such a banger. At this point in their career, Spazz was arguably at their peak, with packed shows and tons of releases to show for their career. But unfortunately, all good things must come to an end, and in December 2000, Spazz played their last show ever at 924 Gilman Street. You may be wondering, what caused Spazz to break up if they were at their peak? Well, it was for a combination of reasons. The first being that Chris Dodge was moving to Los Angeles, and the other being that they were worried that they were running out of ideas and every release after would sound the same. Despite only being around for 8 years, Spazz left their mark on the scene as a pioneer of the 90s West Coast power violence scene, and as an inspiration for other power violence bands to come. Even long after their breakup, some of the members of Spazz are still active in the music scene to this day, like Max Ward with his record label 625 Thrashcore, and Dan Lactose is still DJing under the pseudonym DJ Eons 1. Even though Spazz broke up almost 25 years ago, their legacy lives on today. Thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and comment, and I'll see you guys next time.